Hey, Lynn here from Create Whimsy, and I'm going to show you how to make a traditional cathedral window quilt by machine. So this is going to be a large one because it's easier to show on a large format, and frankly, small is harder than big. We're going to start with a 4-patch. I've got four 12.5-inch squares of this lovely dusty rose colored, and starting with just 4 fabrics to be able to put inside of my cathedral windows here. The first thing you want to do is take one of your fabrics and you want to fold it in half, and then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides. Okay, so I've sewn this piece with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side. Now the next thing we want to do is we're making this back into a square. We're going to take it in the middle. We're going to fold it like this, and we're going to pin the middle. Now I don't know if you like to nest your seams or if you're like to sew them open. I'm a sew open kind of gal unless there's a lot of bulk where I really need to nest them. So I just pin it right here. And what we want to do is sew this seam. Now we want to be able to turn it right side out. See how it's going to form a square again? So I start at one side, I sew just a little bit, leave an opening for turning, and then sew the rest of the seam. So here's one that I've already sewn. So you can see I sewed a little bit, left a gap, and sewed across. The next thing you want to do is you want to trim your corners, because the corners are going to be really important in the finished window. We'll trim those up a little bit, just taking the bulk out of that corner so it'll make a nicer turn. There we go. And then through this opening, we want to turn it right side out. Now the reason why we've done all this instead of just making a square is now all the sides on the square are on the bias. Because the cathedral window, you fold back the fabric and it curves. And so it's really important to be able to have that bias. So here you can see I've just kind of finger pressed it out. I like to use a corner turner. I really like this bamboo one. And just make sure that your corners are poked out. You can see a little bit of my black thread, but I wanted to use black thread so it would be easy for you to be able to see what it is I'm doing. Okay, get these poked out. Okay, and we don't need to worry about closing this gap because that's going to be on the inside. We're going to go ahead and this is what's going to happen is we're going to have these fabric squares inside of this piece. So now that's all done. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and press it. So here's one that's all pressed, and the next thing you do is turn all 4 corners into the center and give it another good press. And I've got one right here. And you can see here's my opening, but that's all going to be covered. Okay, so I've got all 4 of my squares all pressed. They all have flaps. And what you do is you line them up like this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to sew the flaps together. So those 2 together, these 2 together, and then sew this row together. So that's the next step. Okay, so we've got these all sewn together. We've got the 2 folds there, and then the 2 rows sewn together. You can see they all close up. So next thing we want to do is we want to take our inner windows. I like to call these the inner windows because they go inside, and we open up all of our flaps and we put it right in here. The goal is for them to match almost perfectly on the inside. This one looks really good. You don't want them too small because your raw edges might show. And you don't want them too big because then you've got folded fabric in there. If it's off just a little bit, take it back to your cutting table and just trim just a little bit off at this point in time. Okay, and let's see, we'll do another green here. Oh, you might have noticed I went ahead and changed to a pink thread because it might show. Whereas the black was easier to see earlier for those steps. Okay, so we've got these all lined up inside here. And this is one time I do pin. I pin all of these flaps down because the next step, we're going to secure the middle points here. We want to secure all of these points before we start sewing our windows. So what I can do is I can kind of show you, we'll be securing those points and then we'll sew, and what we'll do is we'll be opening these up like that to be able to show our window. So let me go pin all these and sew the stabilizing points. We've got the stabilizing stitches all done. I'll bring it up a little bit closer so you can see I've stitched both vertically and horizontally to be able to hold the points down so that when I fold this back, it'll all stay nice and where I want it. Now what I do is I take the pieces that I want for what I call the outer window and I place them, and they fit right in where we've got these triangles. We'll place these guys. It looks like they're all fitting pretty much perfectly. Let's do this one. It's got some threads on that one. And this guy. There we go. I don't pin these all the way in place. I just put a securing pin in because as I get to the sewing machine and I start stitching, I always adjust it just a little bit, but this holds it in place, especially if you're working on a much larger piece, so that they don't fall all over. We'll go to the sewing machine. And you can see that there's two long lines, your two diagonal lines. I always start on one of the longer lines first. And what we'll do is we'll take a couple securing stitches right at the edge to hold that in. Then we'll fold this back, opening the inner window, and we'll top stitch along there. We'll come here, and I always needle down position, do a couple stitches, and then we'll open up this next window, and we'll be revealing the piece underneath, but at the same time, you can see we're covering the raw edge of what I call the outer window. So we'll sew all down one side and all the way back up the other side. Then I start on the other diagonal and do it, and then I do the inside. Okay, so let's go to the sewing machine. I'll show you how to do this. Okay, so I've put on my top stitch or edge stitch foot for my sewing machine. I find it a lot easier to be able to use that one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that these points are closed, and we're going to do a couple little top stitches right along the corner to secure that, because remember we've got the raw edge of the fabric in there and we want to make sure that it's secured and doesn't come out. And then I put a needle down position, lift my pressure foot, and now we begin to fold this back, and we want to make sure we're covering up those securing stitches. I move my fabric over, I take my needle and put it in the up position, and then I move it to two positions to the right so that I'm top stitching along the edge of this folded fabric. And then you just sew until we get to this center point. Okay, we got to the center point. I needle down, I lift my presser foot, and now is when I take the pin out from what I call the outer window, this piece that's going in this diamond shape. And we want to make sure that the points are in the corners where we've done our stitching, and then we curve this back over the edge, revealing the inside window. Then we put our presser foot back down and we stitch around until we come to the next intersection. Needle down, lift the presser foot, remove the pin, adjust our fabric again so it's nice and straight inside of that diagonal shape. Fold back our curve to reveal the inner window, and sew. Needle down, and this time we don't have anything in because it's just the edge piece, so we don't have anything that we need to cover the raw edge on. We top stitch. What I like to do is when I get to the middle is needle down again. Now remember, we want these points to be nice and sharp and cover that raw edge. So I just kind of finger press it closed like this. And you want at least 1/4 of an inch in case you're going to inset it in something. And that makes sure that you cover that end point of your fabric underneath. And just do this. And then straight stitch till the end. Needle down, turn your piece all the way around. Now we're going to straight stitch again for just a couple of stitches. Needle down. And now we go back and do this on the other side and with all the openings. Okay, I'll finish doing this and then I'll show you how it looks when we're all done. And here's my finished little sampler. We've got the 4 patches where I've got the green behind it, and then I've got, which I call the inner windows and the window frames, and then our outer windows in the different pink tones. So it's a super fun project, and give it a try.